Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome Neil Benson. He's a longtime Microsoft MVP and project delivery expert. He also offers training on delivering projects with the Scrum methodology. Neil recently wrapped up his involvement in a really large-scale project, and we spent some time talking about the challenges there, from the multiple work streams to the company's migration from legacy on-prem to cloud products and services. Neil uses Scrum on this project as he does on many, and he talks about how that worked and some of the complexities when lots of teams are involved. We also talk about some of the key software products that went into this particular project, from Dynamics 365 to Adobe Campaign to RPA, content management, and other solutions. Neil's also busy with other efforts, and we talk about some of those, including his training programs, podcasting, and more. All right. Well, hey, Neil Benson, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jason. I'm a big fan of the show, and I've followed lots of episodes for a long time, and you've had some great guests on recently, so I'm really honored to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I know you do plenty of podcasting yourself. You're a busy person. You're one of the people who you've established such a presence for yourself in the sort of Microsoft ecosystem. Can you tell me a little bit more about, maybe give our listeners the sort of the broad scope of the different things that you do? I know obviously you're an expert in some dynamic solutions and you offer consulting services, but can you give us a sort of the broader picture?
Sure. So I have a background in CRM project delivery as a consultant and as a solution architect. I've run practices for Microsoft partners around customer engagement. But today I'm operating Customery, which is my own business. And there's really two strings to that. One is the, again, kind of customer engagement consulting that I do for local clients, maybe coaching them, advising them, or in the case we're going to talk about RACQ, I hope, which was actually full-time leading their delivery teams on a major program. And the other side of my business is Customery Academy, which is a series of online courses to help Microsoft customers and partners use the Scrum framework to build amazing Microsoft business applications.
Yeah, you've certainly I would say, differentiated yourself on sort of your expertise in Scrum and your focus on it and your training around it. It's certainly one of the things I think of with you. You mentioned RACQ. You had mentioned to me how you were, recently wrapping up your involvement with that organization on a really large scale deployment, right? Can you give us sort of the high level of sort of what all that effort looked like?
Sure. So the RACQ is the Royal Automobile Club of Queensland. So wherever you are in the world, you probably have a local automobile association that will provide roadside assistance. So, you call them up and you've got a flat tire, they'll send out a truck and somebody to help you get back on the road again. So RACQ is the local one here in Queensland. Queensland is a state in northeastern Australia. There's about 4.5 million people, and about 2 million of those are RACQ members. The organization's over 100 years old. And it's diversified, still does roadside assistance today, but diversified into home assistance. So if your washing machine breaks down, they'll help you fix it. They do car insurance, life insurance, pet insurance. And a couple of years ago, they acquired a local bank. So they now offer personal banking services as well. And they had, I'd say, probably a 30-year-old mainframe called Mars, which was their old membership and administration system. And then a slightly more recent CRM system, a homegrown one called MRM, that was almost 20 years old. And those two systems were really just holding the business back. They couldn't launch new products and combinations that they wanted to. They couldn't evolve their membership program the way they wanted to. And so it was time to replace those systems. And after evaluating lots of options, they settled on Dynamics 365 and a CPQ, a configuration, quoting, and pricing application called Apttus as well. So I was involved in deploying those two applications over the last couple of years at RACQ.
Were you around for the selection process itself? Did you see what was Dynamics up against sort of the regular the regular crew of competitors as far as CRM went?
I wasn't, except third hand. I was at the time leading the CRM practice for one of the big four audit firms, and we weren't really able to help RACQ because they were an audit client. So there's a conflict of interest. We had to kind of sit back. So I wasn't able to participate in the evaluation of their solutions. But after I left that firm and set out on my own, I got a call from RACQ to come and help them.
This was what, a 2-year plus project. How does that compare to other projects you've seen? That sounds like one of the bigger projects I've ever heard of.
Sure. In terms of customer relationship management projects on the Microsoft platform, I guess it's certainly one of the biggest I've been involved with. Prior to that, I was involved in a major project. I think you had Frida Maher on your show recently. So she was from the University of New South Wales. I was delivering that project for Frida. Probably wasn't as big as that, but again, it was a long kind of 2 or 3 year program of work with dozens of developers involved in that as well. So yeah, I've been involved in just 2 projects in the last 5 years, but both kind of those enterprise scale, multi-year projects where there's lots of integration involved, lots of change management, hundreds or thousands of users, and so playing at those big projects.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned before, we have in the US we have automobile clubs, similar thing. I've always thought, and I'm a member of AAA, which is probably one of the big ones here. I've always thought they do a terrible job with their customer relationship management. Just watching it as one of their customers, I get just irrelevant mailings from them, and I get spammed with offers for things I don't really want. I figure knowing a little bit about CRM, I always figured they really don't have a great understanding of who I am. I don't know. Did you encounter, coming into this project, kind of a total mess with these legacy systems? It's kind of what I always imagined from the outside.
I have in the past on other projects, certainly, but it was more the opposite at RACQ. They did an amazing job. They had a really close relationship with their members, provided a wonderful service in surveys among the most trusted banks, the most trusted insurance companies. They were always, number 1 and number 2. So they had everything to lose rather than a lot to gain from replacing their technology. And so it was a lot of pressure to not stuff it up. We had a tough job to try and replace these legacy systems, obviously while the business is still operating over this 2-year program, and maintain that kind of brand equity that the club had built up over the last 100 years. I think they do a great job of engaging with their members. And we have a gold 50 is this class of membership. So those people have been a member of the club every year for at least 50 years. And every year there's lunches up and down the state for gold 50 members. And I thought there'd be a couple of people turning up for these lunches. They get upwards of 2,000 people coming along every year for lunch. So there's 2,000 people who've been members of the club for more than 50 years, which I think is just testament to the loyalty that the club has got amongst its members. So it sounds quite different from the experience you've had with your AAA.
Yeah. I mean, what was the company's view of adopting the cloud? Coming from the stance they were on with these very old systems sort of holding things together.
So the CIO was pretty clear that cloud was the direction he wanted to take all the systems in. And so everything that we were deploying is cloud hosted. We had some options to maintain some integration components on-prem, but eventually we hosted all of those in Azure or elsewhere. And that was the first time for a lot of these systems. A lot of the people at RACQ, particularly in the DevOps space, the IT operations area, were having to learn Azure, learn AWS skills for the first time. So that was a real journey for them. And you have to take along all the risk management, the compliance teams as well. So it was a wonderful journey, but I'd say it was probably their first major cloud deployment. A lot of their other legacy systems, like their insurance system, the banking system, are still on-prem.
Yeah. Do you think they were adequately sort of prepared for the transition of, having IT experts who were really Azure or I guess and AWS experts, as opposed to, knowing their data center, knowing their hardware? I ask because, sometimes I do hear grumbles from people, that there's, resistance still within organizations, within IT, of making those kinds of adaptations.
No, I think maybe a few years ago, you might have expected to see that a little bit more. I'd say that the folks at RACQ that were helping to transition all their systems to the cloud were really eager to do it. The writing had been on the wall for a few years, and it's a good step for their career. Nobody wants to be the last on-prem engineer with a screwdriver in his hand. So they were very willing and eager. They maybe didn't have the skills or experience, so they were supplemented by contractors with some specialist skills in different areas, while the permanent staff at RACQ learned those skills. And now a lot of their systems are hosted. And there still is some, like I said, some on-prem data centers with some legacy systems in there. But I imagine as those are refreshed over the next few years, that those will be cloud-based as well.
So this was sort of a 2-year multi-stage, or maybe 2 years plus multi-stage project. You mentioned to me, 5 delivery work streams happening. Work streams? So simultaneous development efforts that you were sort of overseeing and taking on at the same time. What does that look like? I mean, what kind of decisions were you making about how to divide things up?
So the program was really well led. Mark Brumler was our project director. He did a really good job of structuring the program into these delivery streams. So I led the Dynamics 365 development work stream. We had somebody else leading integration, somebody else leading data and analytics, another leader leading business and change. And so that was the way it was structured. There was program management at the top of all of that. And there was 4 tranches of work planned, or 4 phases, but we called them tranches. Tranche 1 was just to come up to par with the existing CRM system and integrate with it. So Dynamics 365 was deployed after about 9 months in July last year, integrating with the legacy MRM system. So the call center consultants were using Dynamics 365 to validate a member's identity, try and provide them service, but dipping back into the legacy systems when they needed to. And then we actually combined tranches 2 and 3 back together again. So tranche 2 just went live just a couple of weeks ago. And then tranche 3 we skipped, and tranche 4 will take place over the next couple of months. That's really just about decommissioning those legacy systems, unplugging them. And I don't know what they're going to do with the servers. Look out on eBay if you're looking for some cheap hardware over the next couple of weeks.
So, I mean, so can you give us sort of the rundown of the actual apps that they're using? It sounds like customer service. I imagine sales is in there. Anything else in the Dynamics side?
And the Dynamics side, really just customer service. So the sales component, like I said, is handled by Apttus. So when as we're serving a consultant in Dynamics 365, if they want to amend their products or buy a new product, then we dip into the product system. So Apttus is the product system for roadside assistance. So if you want to renew your roadside assistance or upgrade it, then we can help you in Apttus with that. And the Guidewire platform, which is a series of applications for insurance companies. So there's Policy Center, Billing Center, and Claim Center, I think are the 3. We integrate with those as well. We've got Aperio and Signature from Fiserv, which are the banking applications. And then there's a couple of other satellite systems as well, like Sitecore, which is providing the online experience for members. That's integrating with the Dynamics 365 APIs, and Adobe Campaign for that email marketing as well. So those are the primary systems that we've got in the new technology stack.
Yeah, so I mean, a pretty good spread of different products there to track. I mean, and I some of those I don't know. The ones I do, I mean, I assume probably adopted as all kind of adopted as fairly new, or maybe some of them they already had.
I was involved in the Adobe Campaign deployment.
Mm-hmm.
That was 2 years ago, just before Jupiter, which is the name of this big program, kicked off. It was called Jupiter because naturally like Jupiter comes after. But yeah, it's their internal code name for the program, because Mars was the legacy system, and what comes after Mars, it's Jupiter. Yeah. So maybe Jupiter's replacement will be called Saturn. But Adobe Campaign, yes, that was fairly new for them. I was really impressed with Adobe Campaign. One of the things it can do as a marketing platform, unlike maybe Dynamics 365 marketing, is run federated queries. So as a marketer, I can say, well, I want to query a market segment of my customers based on some data that's in Dynamics 365, but also product data that's in this other system, or transactional data from my data warehouse. And I will combine all of those attributes into a single query. Yep. Whereas most marketing automation systems, you have to have the data in the marketing automation system in order to be able to build those queries. So Adobe Campaign was good for that. And then Sitecore is a pretty common content management system. It's based on .NET. and it's a good set of APIs, so we can integrate quite tightly with Dynamics 365 customer engagement as well.
Yeah. You can sort of see some of the choices that they probably had to make too. Because I mean, I imagine with like Sitecore, because I know they have a commerce platform, so I imagine someone was trying to ask them, oh well, consider our we also have commerce, and you can wrap it all into one. But they went with Apttus for which I have to be honest, I don't know if I've actually ever seen their full sort of lineup. I know they promote themselves as quote to cash or quote to, I might be getting that wrong, but they have a broad range of offerings, right, within sort of that quoting and sales sort of lineup.
It was maybe 3 years ago, Apttus and Microsoft announced a strategic partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So Apttus was on the tongue of lots of Microsoft account executives, and that's probably how it got introduced into RACQ. But it was pretty clear that was I wouldn't say necessarily recommended by Microsoft, but Microsoft was strongly favoring the Apttus CPQ solution as part of their overall pitch. And it had been up until that point a Salesforce application, so it was built on the Force.com platform, but it had recently been repurposed onto the Azure platform. And so that was part of the strategic relationship with Microsoft was Apttus on Azure, which is how RACQ consumed it. So we're one of probably the early adopters of Apttus running on the Azure stack.
Mm-hmm. No longer on the Azure stack, on Azure, I don't believe. I think Apttus is still an ISV for Dynamics, but I don't know their Azure story right now. If we get more detail on that, I might report on it. But
that strategic partnership, certainly I was hoping it was going to go places. We had Frank Holland, who was a corporate vice president from Microsoft within the business applications group, joined Apttus as their CEO, and I thought that might help strengthen that relationship. Then Apttus was acquired by a venture capital company called Thoma Bravo, and I think recently they've merged with Conga. So I'm not quite sure where they're going to take their Azure-based platform yet, but I think RACQ is taking a look at the same Apttus stack, but on the Force.com platform, because that's where they think most of Aptus's investment is going to go.
Okay. I wonder if that's consequential for a company today, if they're sort of paying for the capabilities and the services, whether they're coming from another cloud or whether they're coming from an Azure tenant. Do you think it's going to matter?
It probably matters to some of the people like me and the team who, on an emotional level, enjoy working with other applications that are hosted in Azure. But the users don't really care. Right. As long as the features are there, it's performant, and it integrates nicely with the rest of the applications they're asked to use. I don't think users really mind whether it's hosted on a Force.com stack or an Azure stack. So it really just depends on what your preferences are. The architects probably don't care that much either, and then it just comes down to fit and cost at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things within sort of the larger cloud, sort of hypercloud provider wars that became very clear a few years ago was how hard each of them, Microsoft, Amazon, even like platforms like Force.com and with Salesforce and others, are just how hard they're fighting to get vendors onto and retain them on their platforms. I mean, to hear that someone like Apttus is no longer on Azure surprised me. I mean, obviously those are decisions that aren't sort of celebrated by the vendors. So it makes sense it's quieter, but I think that push has been extremely intense for years now, to try to win that compute business, I guess, if nothing else.
I think if you're an independent software vendor, you've got to pick one. You probably pick that whatever cloud platform at the very genesis of your product. Trying to switch platforms later is probably quite an expensive engineering feat, even if it's supported by that cloud vendor. And supporting multiple clouds just doubles your costs. So if you were to run on the Google compute platform as well as AWS or as well as Azure, there's not an awful lot of benefit for you or your customers, but there's an increase in costs that you probably don't really want to afford. So you don't hear about those switches very often, but it is complex. We hear of Salesforce Marketing Cloud, for example. There was a press release a few months ago that they're continuing to run their applications on Azure. So, even though they compete in some levels, they're friends and suppliers in other areas as well.
Yeah. So, I'm certainly no Scrum expert. I'm hear you talk about it. I read about it to some extent in other places. I've dabbled in it a bit. But when I think Scrum, I think my view has always kind of been, the bigger and more complex the project, the more challenging Scrum seems to me. This was a big project. What was it like using Scrum here as opposed to, I don't know, on other projects you've done? Was it different? Is this just par for the course from your view and with your knowledge?
In many ways, it was par for the course. So I had two great Scrum Masters assisting me. We had, at one point, we had 3 Scrum teams within the Dynamics 365 delivery squad. And so those have, 6, 7, 8 people in them. So it's a lot of developers. There's a lot going on, a lot of stuff getting delivered on a fortnightly basis. We were running 2-week sprints. It was complicated in this environment because the Apttus team that we're working alongside, the RACQ integration team that we're working alongside, weren't necessarily using Scrum. So we're trying to encourage them to adopt the same kind of 2-week iterations. We're using the same product backlog management tool, which happened to be Jira in this case. But they were, for example, estimating using a different scale. So when we went to what we call the business owners, who help us set the direction and prioritize the different requirements, Apttus were estimating in hours. The integration team were estimating in points using a different story point scale than my team were using. So it was a little messy and in that way. And I wish I had pushed a little bit harder to try and harmonize Scrum across all of the software application delivery teams, because it would have just made things an awful lot easier.
Interesting. Yeah. I can just imagine, I would think of a company like RACQ, old systems. I would think, bureaucratic, difficult to get changes through. It sounds like you have some things you might have done a little bit differently, but overall, this project with multiple moving parts was able to sort of see its way. You're able to still see your way through with some, modern ideas and get teams to sort of, at least move ahead together, if not perfectly aligned.
Yeah, we were pretty fortunate in a couple of ways. One, that I was given a little bit of free rein to run the development team as I saw fit. So I chose Scrum. Physically, we were located in a separate building to the headquarters. So we were downtown here in Brisbane in an old RACQ office space. So the whole project team was there. It was about 100 people in this office, and almost all of us working on the Jupyter program. But we didn't have to bump into the regular IT folks who were doing, other applications and operations and things. So we were, practicing Scrum out of the line of sight of anybody who might have objected to it. So that worked in our favor. But I think the results spoke for themselves. We were regularly churning out these high-value features, trying to keep things on track, deliver on time, and meet some of the timescales that we'd promised our stakeholders. And I think they appreciated that. And I hope we've left behind a legacy of Scrum where it worked well, people enjoyed it. I think that developers certainly enjoy working that way, with the autonomy and the freedom that they get to be able to make lots of technical decisions on the fly without needing necessarily an awful lot of approval. But we did have a process for running things up the chain of command. So we met with the technical design authority every week. So if we wanted to make a big architectural decision, we'd prepare a case for it, present it to them on a Tuesday afternoon, get approval, or maybe have to adjust it and come back for approval the following week. And that really kept us on track as well. So we were given a lot of leeway, but we had guardrails keeping us in the straight and narrow as well.
Yeah, and one of the other things that you have been doing over at least a couple years now is developing training materials, training content for people who want to learn about Scrum, right? Has that process, either the development of materials or sort of interacting with some of your trainees, has that changed your view on where it can be, either where it can be used, how to talk about it, and anything else like that, in this time? Yeah.
So like you said, I've been offering Scrum training for Microsoft Business Applications professionals for about 3 years now. And my goal is to help everybody adopt Scrum where it's the right approach. There are some scenarios where it's probably not the right approach, very simple projects. I think of Dynamics 365 Business Central, where a partner might have developed a template for a a certain industry, and you're just stamping that out in a few days, training your end users, finance team, how to use accounting features in Business Central. That doesn't really justify an approach like Scrum. There are other very simple Power Apps projects where it's just one developer for a couple of weeks. Again, probably doesn't justify Scrum. But for lots of complex and complicated projects where it's a couple of people for a couple of months, anything bigger than that, I think Scrum is a great fit. And it gets us away from the fallacy that we can somehow imagine all of our requirements up front at the start of the project and write them down and play a game of whispers where an analyst gets to talk to the users, write down what the user said, then the developer has to interpret what the analyst wrote down and turn it into software. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 links in that chain. And of course, the users end up with something that wasn't quite what they wanted or needed, because we did all of that work up front at the beginning of the project when the developers know least about what the users really need and the users know least about the software that they're going to be using in the future. So we try and defer that analysis and specification to as late as possible and work in short increments and check it along the way.
Yeah. It's a great story, but I mean, there's just, it's I can see why you have a training series on it, because there certainly is a real skill and sort of understanding that needs to go into actually applying it. I can imagine just going wrong if, having not being properly prepared or having the right mindset.
Yeah, they say the Scrum framework is simple to learn, but difficult to master. There's only 13 parts to the framework. So yeah, it can be learned in a few days, but applying it in a real life project, I think does take a little bit of practice. Although I have had some students, Nick Dolman, for example, was on my podcast a couple of years ago, and he adopted Scrum after taking some training without anybody in his team who had any experience in Scrum. So they're all learning it together, all kind of stumbling along and trying to pick up these best practices as they go. And they were relatively successful with it. And I think partly because they chose some low risk projects, some smaller projects with clients who already trusted them, and brought the clients along on that journey and said, hey, we're going to use Scrum in this. We've never done that before, but we're going to give it a try. We've taken some training. We're going to bring you along on the process as well. And that worked really well for them. So it is possible to start Scrum with nothing more than just a training course. But I think most teams benefit from, like I did, was subcontracting another Microsoft partner who had a lot of Scrum experience and loaned us a really experienced Scrum Master for that first project.
Yeah. Well, to shift gears a bit, back on the topic of RACQ, you talked a little bit about some of the technology. Anything that from this organization that they're doing, that they did technology wise, that you would consider innovative or noteworthy for it, sort of as an interesting idea, something forward looking?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of features, certainly in the dynamic space, that I hadn't seen before, that our team came up with as novel ways to solve some of the business objectives we were trying to meet. So for example, in Adobe Campaign, we wanted to be able to crunch the analytics in there and surface up the next best offer for the member. So if you were a few months away from the expiration of your car insurance policy, we want to surface up an offer that says, hey, if you renew in this period, well, maybe we'll discount your roadside assistance. So presenting those kind of offers in a timely fashion inside Dynamics 365, we came up with some novel engineering ways of integrating those two systems. I'd say that the standard Dynamics 365 integration with Adobe Campaign standard isn't great. And so we had to develop our own. Sometimes you hear about these integrations as part of the strategic partnership between these organizations. Yeah. But it turns out that Microsoft doesn't always have a hand to play in those integrations. So the quality isn't quite what you might expect. So check those carefully, which is something we had to do when we found how the Adobe integration worked. But that worked really well in the end. And it's just, operating those processes at scale. So creating 1 million or 2 million offers per member per day, scrubbing offers that then have been presented and were taken up or weren't taken up, and then refreshing all those offers again overnight to make sure that they're relevant, they're timely, and they're going to be attractive to the member that we're talking to. That was pretty challenging, but turned out to be a great feature. Another one that one of our developers came up with was a concept called a badge or badges. So in the user interface on the main member record, we have a series of badges depending upon properties of your record in the CRM system. So we might have a badge that shows what loyalty level you are bronze, silver, or gold. We have badges that show you that you're a banking customer, that you've got life insurance. We've got a badge that says you've got an overdue bill. And so these badges very quickly give the member engagement consultants a visual indicator of what's happening with that customer's record at that point in time. So when the customer's on the phone, we can click on the badge, for example, the one that says there's an overdue bill. We can remind the customer that they still haven't paid for their car insurance, and we can go ahead and take that payment when they called us about something else. So those badges are quite innovative, and we deployed those for the users, and they love them. They can configure those really quickly. I would say, though, the one big challenge we had with the badges was deciding what icon to use when a member had passed away. So we had a bit of a competition, and there was lots of people suggesting skull and crossbones. My favorite was a chalk outline of a body on a pavement. But I think given that these are frontline users, we settled on a dove with an olive branch in its beak. That was a lot of fun.
So that would that have been something that the actual the deceased person's family would have seen?
No, I don't think any members of the public would have seen it, but you never know, because we do have retail locations as well, and there's always a possibility that a customer could inadvertently see a user's monitor when they're in a branch. So you have to be careful about these things.
Yeah, certainly.
You can have a little bit of fun in a project team, but you got to be careful when it rolls out to the front line.
Yeah, it gets some long hours, and everyone's got. But that is pretty interesting. I mean, this is a time when, at least in the US, I suspect in a lot of parts of the world, there's been a lot less driving with the pandemic. I know it's actually been a little bit lighter impact in Australia, but I imagine there's been some, part of the success Australia seems to have had has been in following guidance. Less driving, did you ever, I know you're kind of rolling out of this engagement, but did you see any impact on a company that's focused on, driving and services for drivers?
Sure. I think there's the recent impacts of COVID for sure had an impact towards the end of our project, both on the club itself and on the way our project was delivered. But the club has taken a long-term view, and over the last 10 years, RACQ has been predicting changes in the way that we own cars and drive cars with the rise of autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles. That has a big impact when you've got a fleet of 1,000 trucks who have mechanics on board that are used to fixing gasoline engines, and suddenly, electric engines start springing up. You've got to retrain that workforce. We've predicted rises in the way that we travel. So maybe more ride sharing and less car ownership, which has big impacts for car insurance as well. And maybe more people, flying cars, and who knows what the future holds. So yes, the club's taken a long-term view and tried to shift its services away from traditional roadside assistance, diversifying the services it provides to its members, but also trying to lead and be an advocate for safe road use across Queensland. And then whenever COVID hit in March, yes, I think there was quite a big impact in the insurance business, for example. So some elements of car insurance in Australia are mandatory. It's called compulsory third-party insurance here in Queensland. So you have to be insured. So if you have an accident, the other person is covered. But it's optional to take on first-party insurance. So, the cost of fixing my car if I'm to blame for the accident. And so some people were in hardship and maybe not renewing their own car insurance at the rates that the club would have previously seen. So that had an impact. But then also on the opposite side, we had claims that were reduced because people were driving less. So I think there was a little bit of unease initially. How is this going to fare out? And then I think it was, they both equaled each other. The reduction in people renewing was balanced out by the reduction in claims. And so the club has come through this, fairly intact and maybe even in a stronger position than it was before.
Okay. And I guess at the same time, the go live for the most recent phases or tranches of capabilities took place during pandemic health restrictions.
Yeah. So like a lot of project teams, that created some moments of uncertainty. I had just taken a week away from the project to sit out at home for MVP Summit, which was made virtual in March this year. And at the end of the MVP Summit, the message coming back from RACQ was, don't come back into the office. So I had taken some kit home. My team were all sent home. And so for a couple of weeks, we just tried working from home. There was some people coming into the office, maybe to pick up a monitor or two. And then that lasted about 2 weeks when the clarification came out that that's it. Everybody stays at home for the foreseeable future. And so we had, at that stage, over 1,000 member engagement consultants now answering calls from home with Genesis soft phones and all their equipment set up at home. And that was a big change for our users, a big change for our members. Thankfully, the levels of service didn't diminish and everybody got the good service they were expecting. But it was a huge job for IT. I can imagine the identity and access people, the security teams, the teams who monitor and provide bandwidth and virtual machines. There was a lot of IT infrastructure and security work. A lot of people working a lot of late nights through March and April to make all that happen for our members. And then, the project wasn't too badly impacted. The teams quickly transitioned to working from home. So we're doing our daily scrums every morning on Teams and using some other tools to support, for example, our sprint retrospectives at the end of the scrum. At the end of the sprint. And really proud of the way that the team, the culture of our teams and the interaction that we had just picked up through Teams almost the same as it was in person. I still miss the team and meeting them in person every day. I'm a big fan of physical co-location and having lots of whiteboards and sticky notes and posters all over my scrum rooms. But I'm adapting like everybody else as well.
Before I forget, one other sort of technology question I meant to get to a little earlier. I was reading through sort of a profile of RACQ, and I noticed they're also adopting RPA through UiPath. Was that something you had visibility into? I'm curious sort of how it's progressed. It sounded like last year they had already done a fairly decent number of automations.
Yeah, it's not something I had direct involvement in, but we, through our innovation lab at RACQ, which is a big project for our CIO who, set it up and sponsored the innovation lab. RACQ has trialed lots of leading edge technologies like RPA and had a lot of success with RPA. We have bots around the place processing forms and things. And to give you an example of one of the ones that might have touched the Dynamics project, within Dynamics, we have a module called CPS, the Contractor Payments System. So RACQ has got a network of independent tow truck operators who tow members on behalf of the club, particularly in regional Queensland and on the islands and stuff where we don't have our own fleet. And those tow truck operators all need to get paid according to their contract based on the mileage and the timing and all these other factors. That was a big computational job. Today, they are sending in dockets, which is a carbon copy piece of paper. There's 3 copies, one kept by the tow truck operator, one comes to RACQ, and I don't know who the third one goes to. And those are faxed in, they're handwritten, they have to be retyped into our system for payment. There are 2 full-time people typing in all those dockets, 15,000 dockets a month. And RPA might be a candidate for automating that. But a better option, at least as far as I'm concerned, would be to give those mobile operators either an application on their phone or a portal back at the office where they can come and type in the same information much more accurately and get paid a lot quicker for the work that they've done on the club's behalf. But there are lots of bots around RACQ doing a good job. I don't know what your thoughts are, Jason. I'm skeptical of the long-term viability of RPA. It's great for legacy systems where there's no API available and you can't do any kind of direct integration. But I'd rather, if I was a CIO, if anybody was going to appoint me CIO, what would you do, Neil? I would modernize those legacy systems, make sure there's a modern API available so that I can reduce the need for bots that provide pretty dumb system integration services.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And it seems like that's what a lot of the RPA vendors, Microsoft included, but also others I've talked to, not sure about UiPath, but I've talked to people from other vendors. And that seems to be one of the things that they fall back on is that fact that those legacy systems do need to be sort of wrapped into a modern new automated processes, and this is the way to do it. Even if it's just a stopgap, it might be a 5-year stopgap. The thing that I'm potentially very interested in is the idea of sort of process discovery software. Microsoft just did a partnership with a vendor that does that. That's sort of, I think it's meant to go with Power Automate, but it's essentially sort of desktop or sort of workspace sort of detection, essentially working on employees' machines and sort of detecting the processes that they're doing in a repetitive manner all day, and sort of almost just providing input to the business into what kind of repetitive things could be automated that are just like slowing people down, even if they don't know it. So I think there's some interesting discoverability stuff that I think it then feeds into, Flow, or feeds into another RPA solution, but maybe that
would be interesting, because I think as a business analyst, whenever I've interviewed users about what they do, they tell you what they're supposed to be doing and how they do it in a perfect world. But I'm sure real life, when there's nobody watching over their shoulder, it's a lot messier than that. And they're taking shortcuts, and there's workarounds, and there's spreadsheets and Post-it notes. That's what life's like in business operations, except when you're being interviewed, as part of a project team. When you present this picture that, there's a nice flow chart that you're following. I think, that's a really interesting idea, that you could use software to analyze people's actual work to figure out what it is that they are doing and try and model that somehow so you can perhaps automate it.
Yeah, and the one I was thinking of, I just pulled it up, was Fortress IQ, is one that Microsoft has forged a partnership with. They describe themselves as process discovery automation, and it essentially the findings feed into the RPA, but they themselves are not RPA. So it's an interesting idea. I haven't really seen too much more of how it actually plays out, but
sounds good.
Cool. Well, one of the things I find so interesting about the work you do is sort of, you seem to have a real love of like media, whether it's video, obviously podcast, but then, even other things, sort of more artistic, kind of things where you're doing sort of graphic things, and you do stuff with Lego scenery that I've seen. Are there areas like that you really kind of, use sort of your professional life to kind of work some of those other passions into it? Am I right about that?
Certainly, I've got a little bit of a reputation for the Lego stuff. So that just started out as me trying to figure out how I could illustrate some of the concepts of Scrum. Could I do some graphic design, maybe some cartoon characters? Do I need to hire an illustrator? My own graphic design skills are very limited. And I tripped over somebody else who was illustrating some other concepts using Lego figures. I thought, I could probably do something with that. So, raided my kids' Lego storage tub and found some figures. Ended up buying a few more figures. And my kids love that, because Customery can buy the Lego. I can shoot different scenes with it. And then once I'm done with the photography, the Lego seems to disappear back into the kids' rooms, and I never see it again. And so now I send out a Customery Lego minifigure. So I get them printed with a Customery logo on the shirt, and those get sent off to students who've completed the course. And you can't see it right beside me. I'm trying to build the Customery Lego in a big kind of series of tiles. So I've got about 4 big tiles. They're about a foot square. And there's 4 or 5 of those, trying to build out the Customery logo. But it turns out that the colors I need are pretty rare. So I'm ordering bricks from the US, from Japan and Korea. And because of COVID, those are taking a while to get here. So it might be a couple more months before that's done. But that's about the limit of my creative superpowers, if you like. But I do enjoy trying to illustrate various, project scenes with Lego minifigures. And hopefully there's, those give people a giggle.
You're also, you sort of evolved your podcasting. You do at least a couple of things right now. You have Amazing Apps, which is, I think, your current podcast sort of series. You're also, I just picked up on you started a new series. I apologize, I forget who your co-host is, but sort of analyzing LinkedIn profiles, right?
Yes.
That's how's that one going?
It's going great. So it's called Pimp My LinkedIn Profile. My co-host is Amy Holden, and I'll give credit or all the blame to Amy for the name of that show. We were struggling for ages, and 2 seconds before we started recording, Amy came up with the name. So it's called Pimp My LinkedIn Profile. And the goal there is just to have a bit of fun for 10 or 15 minutes. We invite people to apply. mostly from the business applications community. And then we review their LinkedIn profile and give them some hints and tips on how they could make the most of it. Which has been a lot of fun. We've done 5 or 6 episodes together. Got another one recording this evening. And we just had Ben Vollmer and John Levesque profiled on there. And those shows are a lot of fun to record and to watch people's reactions. In fact, I got John Levesque this weekend asking me for help to rewrite some of the parts of his profile, which wasn't my intention behind the show, but you're welcome, John. And I've taken my own podcast, just expanded it a little bit. It was really just focused around Scrum. And now with the new name, Amazing Applications, it's trying to interview the people behind amazing Microsoft business applications and find out what led to their success, the success of a project. So we try and case study one project on each show. Sometimes I do a solo show, but I just published an episode last night with Ana Ines Urrutia de Souza from Peru, talking about one of her Dynamics 365 for talent projects and what made that a success. So that's been very well received. And trying to drill into and share the insights that we can get from the people behind amazing projects.
I'll have to check. I'll have to check that one out. I hadn't seen it. I never hear anything about Dynamics in Peru, and I almost never hear anything about talent projects either. So, or HR, as it's now known. Yep. But I said I wouldn't quiz you on product names. But that is interesting. If it's gained some traction. Anything else you wanted to touch on before we get going here?
No, I think I'm all good, Jason. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and share some of the lessons I've learned from RACQ. Thank you for not asking me about where it went wrong and nearly fell off the rails. I appreciate that. Hopefully people learn something from a project at that scale.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, it had a great write-up. I think when it was part of the way done, I appreciate you sharing sort of the rest of the story here with us, or as much of it as you could in the time we had. Yeah,
well, I've got a lot of requests from people asking about how to estimate and plan agile projects, and particularly how to estimate them. So perhaps when I've developed some content, we can do some webinars together and share some of the content with your audience.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Well, thanks again, Neil. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Jason. My pleasure.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Neil Benson for joining today. To learn more about Customery and the Customery Academy, you can go to customery.academy. That's CUSTOMERY. Neil's podcast, Amazing Apps, is found at amazingapps.show. And for videos from Customery, youtube.com/Customery. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can follow us on Twitter at msdynamicsworld. And until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.